Picture this. A man standing outside a factory at midnight, keys to its destruction in his pocket, but unable to move forward. Behind those walls, a woman who challenged everything he believed in. Ahead of him, an empire demanding he crush her world. What you do when destroying someone's life means destroying your own soul. This is the story of Julian Crest, a billionaire who learned that some things cost far more than money can measure. Have you ever had to choose between success and your conscience? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. Because what happened to Julian could happen to any of us when we're forced to look beyond the bottom line. Julian Crest didn't become CEO of Crest Dynamics by being soft. At 34, he'd already doubled his father's empire, turning a regional manufacturing company into a multinational powerhouse. He measured worth in quarterly earnings and shareholder satisfaction. Emotions were distractions. Sentiment was weakness. When the board presented him with the Marlow County acquisition, he barely glanced at the details. An aging textile factory on prime real estate. Perfect location for their new manufacturing hub. Demolish it, expand operations, boost profits. Simple mathematics. For Julian, it was just another transaction in a long line of strategic moves. For the people of Marlow, it was a death sentence. That factory wasn't just brick and machinery. It was the town's heartbeat, the place where 3 generations had worked, laughed, struggled, and survived. Inside those walls, looms had been humming for 60 years, weaving more than just fabric. They'd woven the very identity of Marlow County. Nora Vale knew every rhythm of those machines. She'd spent nearly a decade there, working alongside her widowed mother until cancer took her 3 years earlier. The factory had been her refuge during grief, her purpose when everything else felt meaningless. At 28, her hands could guide thread through looms blindfolded. She knew every worker's name, every family story. She'd celebrated weddings, mourned losses, witnessed births announced during lunch breaks. The day the acquisition notice arrived, Nora watched grown men cry. Maria, who'd worked there for 30 years and put 3 kids through college, stood frozen, clutching the paper like it might dissolve if she held it tight enough. Tom, a 3rd-generation weaver teaching his daughter craft, looked at Nora with eyes that asked a question neither of them could answer. What now? Everyone expected panic. Instead, Nora felt something else igniting inside her, a fierce, unshakable defiance. They wanted to erase generations of work for profit margins and expansion plans? Not without a fight. She organized within days. Petitions circulated. Town meetings packed the community center. Local news covered their protests. Some called her stubborn, others naive. Fighting a corporation with unlimited resources seemed like screaming into a hurricane. But Nora refused to watch everything her community built vanish because some CEO decided their lives were acceptable collateral damage. The town hall meeting came 3 weeks after the announcement. Tension saturated the air, thick enough to taste. Julian arrived expecting formality, let the locals vent, offer standard platitudes, move forward. He'd done this before. Present the numbers, show the inevitable, leave. The room would be hostile, but ultimately powerless. Then Nora stood up. She didn't yell, didn't plead. Her voice cut through the noise with surgical precision, asking questions that board members would never dare voice. Do you even know our names, Mr. Crest? Or are we just line items on your acquisition report? Julian opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. Have you ever built something with your own hands? Spent years mastering craft? Watched your mother's fingers bleed from fabric burns because she refused to slow down, refused to let her family go hungry. The room went silent. Julian felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not annoyance, but a hairline fracture in the armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there. Tell me, Mr. Crest, what's your life worth in quarterly earnings? Because you're about to calculate ours. The meeting ended badly. No resolution, no compromise. But Julian left with Nora's questions echoing in his mind, refusing to fade even as he returned to his penthouse and tried to focus on other deals. If you were in that room, whose side would you take? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're invested in this story. Something shifted in Julian that night. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, He told himself it was due diligence when he made the decision to visit Marlowe alone, quietly, wanted to see what he was really tearing apart. No assistant, no security detail, just him and a rented car pulling into town after dark. He found the factory just as the evening shift ended. Through the windows, he watched Nora moving through the floor, packing rolls of leftover fabric for displaced workers. She worked with an intensity that reminded him of himself, except she was fighting to save lives, not quarterly reports. Julian followed her at a distance as she moved through town. She stopped to check on an elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, who thanked her for helping her grandson land a factory job 2 years earlier. At the corner store, a young couple told her they were finally saving enough for their wedding, thanks to the overtime shifts. Children ran up with drawings made from fabric scraps she'd given them. Each moment hit Julian like a hammer blow. This wasn't about buildings or profit margins. It was about lives, dreams, futures woven together so tightly that pulling one thread unraveled everything. Nora spotted him eventually. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed the street with purpose. "Checking up on your investment, Mr. Crest?" "I wanted to see." He stopped, unsure how to finish. "What you're erasing." She studied him, and for the first time, her expression held something other than defiance. Maybe pity, maybe understanding. "You want to really see? Come work a shift. Tomorrow morning. Experience what you're about to destroy." Julian's pride screamed refusal. But something deeper, a part of himself he'd buried under years of corporate ruthlessness, whispered acceptance. He showed up at dawn. The work humbled him. Within an hour, his hands blistered. His back ached from standing. The noise rattled his skull. But worse than the physical discomfort was realizing how little he understood about the world he dismissed as unskilled labor. These workers were artists. The precision required, the years of mastery, the pride in their craft. Julian watched Maria guide fabric through her loom with movements so practiced they seemed like dance. Tom explained thread weights and weave patterns with the passion Julian, reserved for merger negotiations. During lunch, Nora sat beside him. She shared her mother's story, how the factory had taken her in as a teenager fleeing an abusive home, how it had given her dignity, purpose, a family, how Nora grew up in those break rooms, learned to read from safety manuals, found her first sense of belonging. "Still think this is just real estate?" Nora asked as the shift ended. Julian couldn't answer, because the truth was choking him. He'd spent his entire career building an empire, but these people had built something far more valuable. Community, legacy, meaning. Have you ever had someone completely change your perspective on life? Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss how this story unfolds. They started meeting after his shifts, quiet conversations outside the factory as stars emerged. Julian and Nora, two people from impossibly different worlds, discovering they weren't so different after all. She challenged him with questions that haunted his sleepless nights. "What will people say about you when you're gone, Julian? That you made money? Or that you made a difference? Is power worth it if you're alone at the top?" For the first time, he shared vulnerabilities he'd never voiced. The weight of his father's expectations, crushing and constant. The empire he'd inherited but never questioned. The suspicion that he'd built a throne in a kingdom of isolation. "I don't know who I am without this," he admitted one night. "The company, the success, it's all I've ever known." "Maybe that's a problem," Nora said softly. "You've never asked yourself what you want, only what you're supposed to want." Back in the city, the pressure intensified. Shareholders demanded action. Every delay cost millions. His COO cornered him in his office, face tight with frustration. "This hesitation is weakness, Julian. Your father never wavered. Sign the papers, or the board will find someone who will." Julian stared at the demolition authorization on his desk. One signature. That's all it took to proceed. To prove he was still the ruthless CEO everyone expected. He couldn't do it. He returned to Marlowe that night, unannounced, needing to see Nora. He found her alone in the factory, sitting in the darkness among silent looms, crying. The final eviction notice had arrived. Despite every petition, every protest, every desperate attempt, they'd lost. It was over. Her devastation shattered something fundamental inside him. "I'm so sorry." His voice cracked. "This is my fault. I could have stopped this weeks ago, but I was too afraid." "Afraid of what?" She looked up, tears tracking through the dust on her face. "Of choosing you over everything I was supposed to be." The confession tumbled out, his attraction to her, his crisis of conscience, his realization that destroying this place destroyed the only part of himself worth saving. "I don't know how to be the person you make me want to be." Nora stood, crossing to him. "Then don't be the person they made you. Be the person you choose to be. You have the power, Julian. Use it differently." The board meeting 3 days later will become legendary in corporate circles. Julian Kress walked into that mahogany panel room and announced he was canceling the Marlowe acquisition. Chaos erupted. Accusations of incompetence, betrayal, weakness. Julian stood calm in the storm. "I'm restructuring the deal. Kress Dynamics will partner with the factory, modernize operations, preserve jobs, and create an ethical supply chain. We'll prove profit and purpose can coexist." "You're throwing away millions for sentiment," his COO shouted. "No," Julian said quietly. "I'm investing in something that actually matters." The vote came swiftly. The board removed him as CEO. Julian accepted it without protest. Some things mattered more than quarterly reports. If this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose people over profit. Julian drove back to Marlowe that afternoon, no longer CEO, but feeling lighter than he had in years. He found Nora at the factory, surrounded by celebrating workers. News had spread. Julian had used his personal fortune to restructure the factory independently, investing in equipment, expanding operations, ensuring every job remained. Nora saw him and went still. Then she was crossing the floor, and he was meeting her halfway, and words became unnecessary. "You asked what I'm worth," he said. "I found out today not much in stock options, but everything in the things that actually matter." 6 months later, Julian works in that factory every day, not as a CEO or investor, as a partner, learning the craft beside Nora. The business thrives, proving that profit and purpose aren't enemies, but allies when guided by conscience instead of greed. He lost his empire, but gained his soul. Lost his title, but found his purpose. Lost everything he thought mattered, and discovered what actually did. Real power isn't in what you can destroy. It's in what you choose to build. And sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what truly matters. A lesson Julian learned from the poor girl he was meant to destroy, but who saved him instead. What would you sacrifice for love or principle? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Earthly Tales for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Because in the end, we're all just searching for something worth more than money can buy.